This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
So she starts by saying that as a social anthropologist who has studied issues that arise out of the practice of transnational adoption of abandoned children from the South and former Soviet states into Western Europe, in particular into Norway, her research addresses on our list of research questions numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 and 8, so very central to our concerns here. But she can't deal with all these in this paper, obviously, but she's written about them elsewhere, and on the bibliography that's coming around there's a lot of her own references there, so if you want to follow up her work, it's there. So my eye is now Signe. I want to start by reading statements made by two prospective adoptive mothers upon being told that their dreams of getting a child are coming true. So this is a quote. Tuesday, September the 8th, 1981, at 19 hours, the telephone call that we were waiting for came. I don't remember if I was sitting or standing, but I do remember the overwhelming feeling of joy that filled me when the agency told me that I had become the mother of a tiny little boy. From that telephone conversation, it was that boy, Chevron, who was our boy. We hadn't seen him, not even a photo, not held him, but I felt so strongly that it was precisely he who was our son. And there's another quote, this carries on, we're going to leave on Monday, it can't be true, the feelings at this moment can't be described, all thoughts stand still, after 3 years of waiting and more waiting, we're finally going to become parents, hopefully. The uncertainty and the doubts are not far away. These statements from mothers of a boy from India and that second one was a different person, and a girl from Chile, are typical. They illustrate the powerful emotionality of a situation, involuntary childlessness, that is experienced as a profoundly unhappy one, and the intense happiness that accompanies the fulfillment of the longings. Using empirical material from my study of those involuntary childless couples in Norway who, due to a virtual non-existence of native children available for adoption in order to become a normal family, decide to adopt a child from a distant and usually unknown land, I shall explore how what I call the kinning process transforms the unknown, unconnected child into our child. I shall link the practical and emotional journey that most adoptive parents undergo to changes over the past 100 years in the meaning of the family, the meaning of motherhood, fatherhood and childhood in Norway, and argue that these social statuses have become imbued with increased psychological elaborations and expectations, which in turn intensify the feelings of those concerned. Our transnational adoption in Norway began in the late 1960s. The first children came from Vietnam and South Korea, later from other Asian countries, from Latin America, and more recently from Africa and Eastern Europe. Despite advances made in new reproductive technologies, the demand to adopt abandoned children from poor parts of the world continues to increase. A question that immediately arises is how adoptive parents in a society whose cultural understanding of kinship and relatedness is strongly focused upon biogenetic connection, and where an idiom of flesh and blood constitutes the meaning of kinship, handle the fact of an unknown child from an unknown country, who in most cases will look very different from themselves. Part of the answer, I suggest, can be found in public debates surrounding involuntary childlessness and its possible solutions, so new research, so reproductive technologies, sperm donation and transnational adoption, that familiarises the public with the issue, and in part in the kinning process that adoptive parents engage in. During my researches, I have identified a practice which I call kinning. This concept has become important in my analysis. By kinning, I mean the process by which a fetus or newborn child, or any previously unconnected person, is brought into a significant and permanent relationship with a group of people which is expressed in a kin idiom. Although most people are not aware of doing so, I suggest that newborn children everywhere through a number of culturally defined acts, are kinned into sets of kinship relations. In the case of adoption, kinning is a self-conscious and deliberate activity and thus more clearly noticeable. Because transnational adoption in contemporary Norway is such a public practice, taking place in a cultural climate that predicates kinship on biogenetic connectedness, and because adoptive parents engage so deliberately in transcending the fact that they are not biologically connected to their children, my attention was led toward this previously hidden aspect of kinship. Through a process of kinning, adoptive parents enrol their adopted children into a kin trajectory that overlaps their own. Issues pertaining to time, place, body and personhood become central in this process, and it is a process which in most cases is fraught with tensions, ambiguities, ambivalences and contradictions, not least because the parents are faced with the dilemma of incorporating the child into their own kin group at the same time as they must acknowledge the existence of unknown biological relatives in an unknown land. Through kinning, adoptive parents thus not only incorporate their children into their own kin, they also transform themselves into parents. In so doing, they negate the dichotomy between the social and the biological that is encountered elsewhere in society. Kinning affects all parties involved. The adoptees certainly undergo very radical changes to their former selves, but the parents also emerge profoundly affected. I wish to suggest that adoptive parents and their adopted children recreate each other intersubjectively as individuals and as mother, father and son, daughter. Through being kinned, the adoptees qualify their personhood through their relations to others, primarily their adoptive parents, just as the adoptive parents, through kinning, adjust their personhood through their relations to others, primarily their adopted children. They all become fixed as kinned persons by virtue of their particular relationships. So in this presentation, I shall give some of my findings regarding how the kinning process creates satisfactory relationships and thus contradicts assumptions of the expert professions, pedagogues, psychologists, social workers and civil servants, many of whom tend to view adoption and transnational adoption in particular as problematic and as a highly disturbing experience for all concerned, an attitude that is reflected in the media and amongst the general public. So this section is called Changing Moral Reasoning About Family and Childhood. She gives a historical and cultural context to her paper, but I'm going to sort of skip the earlier bit and then come through to 1950s in Norway. So during the 1950s in Norway, motherhood became the manifestation of one's success as a woman. As a result, infertility was deemed shameful and attempts to recompense it through adoption were shrouded in secrecy. Though Norway has a high birth rate and an estimated 92 to 94% of all women have given birth by the time they reach the age of 40. Children are important in contemporary Norwegian understandings of sociality, in which family life is crucial to social life. Most adoptive parents interviewed give us a reason for wanting to adopt, that they felt themselves to fall outside the activities of their contemporaries and that they wanted to remedy this by becoming a normal family. Not having children is perceived as a distinct handicap that becomes detrimental to the quality of one's social as well as one's personal life. Well, partly as a result of the women's and later gay movements, involuntary childlessness became a political as well as a personal issue. Notions of shame about one's infertility vanished to be replaced by demands for public assistance to alleviate the condition, making procreation and family life amongst the hottest political issues of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The adoption and medical procreation legislation in Norway has been, though, surprisingly conservative. Although the law did not stipulate that adopters should be married heterosexual couples, this was until recently practiced. Today, single women are increasingly being given permission to adopt, and a few men also, but single women are not allowed sperm donation. After the marriage law of 2009, same-sex married couples are no longer prevented from adopting. However, as no adopting country will knowingly release a child for adoption by a homosexual couple, Norwegian authorities are reluctant to consider applications. So the next section is called Becoming Adoptive Parents. In terms of per capita, Norway topped the European list of the number of adoptees from abroad. Adoption is a process that includes a more than average involvement of husbands as prospective fathers in the whole process. In a sense, the parents-to-be are both pregnant together, and the birth affects them both equally. This means that adoptive parents have a self-image of being particularly equal with regard to the distribution of responsibility, care and love. Subsection kinning the adopted child, the first of those are she calls pre-pregnancy. I have described the process of transnational adoption as one that may be broken down into 3 stages of kinning, which are described using naturalised vocabulary. The first of these is the pre-pregnancy stage, when a couple decides that the time has come for them to start a family. They start to imagine themselves as a family, creating a mental and emotional space for their child to be. Those who eventually make applications to adopt after failed attempts to conceive themselves have to prove their suitability as prospective adoptive parents to social workers, adoption agencies and the authorities in the donor country. So this is a time of refocusing their expectations from producing a child from their own bodies to adopting a child born by alien bodies in an alien land. And come to pregnancy. Pregnancy starts when the couple receive official approval and their application is sent to the country of their choice. Adoption agencies and couples alike employ the term of pregnancy for this period, thereby investing it with familiar connotations. The couple now know that they will one day be the parents of a child from that country, but they do not know how long their pregnancy will last. It can take 1 to 4 years. The pregnancy stage is tinged with excitement and impatience. They start to prepare for family life. They tell family and friends about their plans. Whereas parenthood is now definite, the child is still unidentified and his or her time of arrival is unknown. Well, during this time, couples participate in classes organised by the adoption agencies, which will prepare them for the forthcoming birth. In such fora, prospective parents are confirmed in their status. They discuss amongst themselves questions of bonding, of language learning, developmental problems, which may result in later difficulties at school, issues of race and racism, and they are given advice on how to handle the fact of adoption in their relationship with their children. Through these activities, the future child is being firmly kinned into their imagination. These classes are highly emotional events. Tears are never very far away. During this time, prospective parents frequently form lasting relationships with each other. Next is birthing. The adopted child's birth is not an event, but a prolonged process, which I suggest starts when the parents are informed that a particular child has been allocated to them, and ends when the child is installed in his or her new home. The news that they have got a child, that is, that they have become parents, is described by everyone I have talked to as momentous. Normally they have 24 hours to accept the child. In my experience, no one has refused the child they are offered, even though details regarding sex or age may not correspond to their preferences. A scenario of fate and destiny circumscribes the event, and to question this, it seems to be unthinkable. The quote at the start of my presentation is typical. Upon accepting the child, the parents are sent a photo which they immediately distribute amongst friends and family. They actively engage in killing their imagined child through numerous little acts and utterances, so that by the time of arrival, he or she will be acknowledged an acknowledged integral part of the family. This birthing process may take anything from 6 to 18 months. The immediate bonding that occurs upon receiving information about their child's identity is very profound, and it's being consolidated through the kinning activities performed during the birthing period. There's no doubt in parents' minds that the allocated child is somehow meant for them. They give the child a Norwegian name in addition to the local one, and refer to him or her by that name. It has become a person, a kin person. Biology is irrelevant. To them, it is their child who is waiting to come home. Maybe an imagined child, but it is no less real and loved for that. The following example demonstrates the strength of the attachment formed by the parents to the allocated child. An allocated daughter died at the orphanage before her parents had been given permission to collect her. The parents had experienced a deep sense of grief. Their daughter had died. Like the death of any child, she had to be ritually released from them, and they arranged a memorial service in the local church where they mourned their loss in the company of family and friends. Despite never having set eyes on her, the couple had completely accepted her as their daughter. As an imagined person, she had been kinned into their own Norwegian set of kin. Her very existence had made the previously childless couple into a mother and father, and in their mind's eye, she was as real to them as if she was actually with them. So we'll move on from that one on to the first meeting between the parents and the child. So the first meeting is the culmination of the birth. Since the 1990s, it has been common for adoptive parents to travel to the child's country of origin and collect the child themselves. Magazines published by the Norwegian adoption agencies regularly carry reports by adoptive mothers, less so by fathers, in which they describe the intensity of the triumphs and tribulations of the journey to China, Colombia, or wherever, that resulted in them bringing home the child of their imagination. The fact of imagining looms large in adoptive parents' description of this last stage. The description by a mother on her way to Colombia to pick up her daughter is typical. Quote, "It was all rather unreal. Finally, on our way to Colombia to experience an unknown country and to collect our beautiful little daughter, Oda Silvia. We just received a photo of her before having to get ready. Love at first sight. The protection instinct arrived immediately when I held the photo in my hands. We were so happy and excited. We could hardly believe that this lovely girl was ours." This is another one. And then, tears in the taxi. Tears while we were waiting. A good, calm feeling of happiness when they brought me a small girl dressed in pink. The maternal feeling was immediately aroused. End quote. As I've shown, the period from when a couple decides to adopt until they have a child who they may call their own reaches its climax when they are handed the child. They've become a normal family. The killing processes that have been performed at different stages make the moment feel natural. That's just a short conclusion. I'm just going to finish. To obtain a child through one's own body or through adoption are, of course, two very different procedures. However, many adoptive parents like to talk about the two processes as more similar than different. Listening to a mother of three adopted children, who is also a midwife, giving a talk to a group of prospective adoptive parents, I was struck by the very deliberate way she likened adoption to birth. She did so less from a biological standpoint and more from an emotional and moralistic one. The expectations and anxieties about the future child are very similar in both kinds of parents, she said. Adoption and birth are two sides of the same coin. She went on to talk about postpartum depression, not uncommon amongst birth mothers, and said that this also happened to adoptive mothers, although it's not so much talked about. In fact, according to her, it's been a taboo subject in adoption circles, just as used to be the case with birth mothers. This is her quote, "You have waited so long before you finally have your child in your arms," she said. "You have gone through much more stress than an average biological mother. Therefore, it's not surprising that when finally the day arrives and all your dreams are fulfilled, you may experience that your initial euphoria gives way to a sense of anticlimax, even disappointment. This is natural and you must not feel upset or guilty about this. I know it will vanish after a few days or weeks. Just let the fact of being a family slowly settle in your consciousness. Don't fret and you will soon recapture the joy that you had anticipated." Signe.